I was 23 years old when this happened, working the closing shift at a hospital cafeteria on the outskirts of town. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid my bills and kept me enrolled in community college part-time. My shift ended at 11 at night, which meant I was always catching the last bus home. The route ran until midnight, then shut down completely until 5 in the morning. If you missed that final bus, you were either calling an expensive taxi, walking for miles through questionable neighborhoods, or spending the night somewhere you probably shouldn't be. The stop where I waited sat at the very edge of the hospital's massive parking lot, right where the medical campus ended and this stretch of abandoned buildings began. During the day, the place was actually pretty busy. You'd see visitors coming and going, medical staff grabbing coffee between shifts, delivery trucks making their rounds. But after 10 o'clock, it was like someone flipped a switch. The hospital went into quiet mode, the parking lots emptied out, and those abandoned businesses across the street turned into these dark, hollow shells that just stared back at you. Here's the thing about isolated bus stops that nobody really talks about. When there's nothing around, no open stores with people inside, no cars driving by regularly, no neighbors looking out their windows, it's like this invitation for bad things to happen. The darkness gives people cover. The emptiness makes them bold. I didn't think about all this stuff consciously back then. I just knew deep in my gut that something about waiting at that stop felt wrong. You know how your brain sometimes picks up on danger before you can put it into words? It was like that. The stop itself was pretty basic, just a metal bench under one of those cheap plastic shelters, lit by a single streetlight that flickered more than it actually worked. Behind it, a chain-link fence tried to separate the sidewalk from this overgrown empty lot where trash just piled up whenever the wind blew. Across the street, those abandoned storefronts looked back at me with broken windows and spray-painted walls. On a good night, maybe one or two other people would be there waiting with me. On the bad nights, I was completely alone. I'd been working at that hospital for about 8 months when I first noticed him. This guy, maybe in his 40s, always wearing the same stained navy jacket and lugging around this big duffel bag. The weird part? He never actually got on the bus. He'd just sit there on the bench or stand near the shelter, watching. At first, I tried to tell myself he was probably homeless, maybe just looking for a safe spot to hang out, or maybe he had some mental health stuff going on and the routine of the buses coming and going gave him comfort. I really wanted to be understanding, not judge someone who was clearly going through something. But then things started getting weird. He began moving closer to where I stood. If I shifted to the far end of the shelter to put some distance between us, he'd eventually drift that way too. Not right away, though. He was smart about it. He'd wait a few minutes, shift his weight around, take a couple steps, lean against a different part of the shelter. Slow, casual movements that would seem totally innocent if you weren't paying close attention. But I was paying attention. When you're a young woman alone at night, you learn to track these things like your life depends on it. The eye contact was what really got under my skin. He would just stare, not even blinking, until I could literally feel his eyes on me, like something physical pressing against my back. Eventually, I couldn't help it. I'd have to look back. And when our eyes met, his expression never changed. No, "oh, sorry, didn't mean to stare" look, no embarrassment at getting caught, just this flat, empty stare that made my skin crawl. Then he'd slowly smile, but it wasn't a real smile, It was like watching someone who'd seen other people smile and was trying to copy it, but didn't actually understand what smiling meant. After about 2 weeks of this pattern, I started switching things up. I'd wait inside the hospital lobby until exactly 5 minutes before the bus was supposed to show up. Then I'd sprint out to the stop at the last possible second. This actually worked pretty well for a while. I'd run across that parking lot, get to the shelter, and boom, the bus would pull up within a minute or two. The guy was usually already there, but at least I didn't have to stand there for 15 minutes feeling his eyes boring into the back of my head. Then the bus schedule changed. Budget cuts, the driver told me with this apologetic shrug. The 11:45 bus was getting pushed back to midnight.
I know 15 minutes doesn't sound like much, right? But when you're standing under a flickering streetlight with someone who makes every instinct in your body scream danger, 15 minutes feels like forever.
The first night of the new schedule, I tried my usual tactic of waiting inside and timing my exit. But when I pushed through the hospital doors at 11:55, I saw him standing right at the entrance to the sidewalk, blocking the path to the bus stop. I froze, still within sight of the hospital security cameras and the front desk visible through the glass doors. He was just standing there, duffel bag at his feet, hands in his jacket pockets, staring directly at me. I backed up, retreated into the lobby. Through the windows, I watched him. He didn't move, just kept his eyes locked on the door where I'd appeared. After about 5 minutes, he picked up his bag and slowly walked back toward the bus shelter, glancing over his shoulder the entire way. My hands were shaking as I approached the security guard at the front desk. I'd seen him around during my shifts. He was an older man, probably nearing retirement, who mostly sat reading paperback novels between his rounds. I explained the situation, described the man, told him about the weeks of escalating behavior. The guard listened, nodded sympathetically, and told me he'd walk me to the bus stop and stay until the bus arrived. True to his word, he accompanied me outside. The man was back at the shelter, sitting on the bench. When he saw us approaching together, something shifted in his demeanor. The blank expression disappeared, replaced by what I can only describe as barely contained rage. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. But he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched us with this intense, burning focus. The security guard stood with me, making small talk about nothing in particular, clearly trying to keep the atmosphere light. When the bus finally arrived, I thanked him profusely and climbed aboard. Through the window, I watched the man remain seated on the bench, staring after the bus as it pulled away. He still didn't get on, just sat there, rage etched into every line of his face. I thought that would be the end of it. I'd exposed his behavior, brought someone else into the situation. Surely he'd leave me alone now. I couldn't have been more wrong.
3 nights later, the security guard wasn't on duty. Budget cuts again. The hospital was reducing overnight security to just the essential personnel monitoring the ER entrance. I didn't learn this until I finished my shift and found a different guard at the front desk, someone I didn't recognize, someone who definitely wasn't interested in walking a cafeteria worker to a bus stop. I considered calling a taxi, but I was already stretching my paycheck thin, and a taxi home would cost nearly half of what I'd earned that night. So I made the decision I'd replay in my mind 1,000 times afterward. I walked to the bus stop alone. He was waiting. The moment I rounded the corner of the parking lot and the bus shelter came into view, I saw him standing there, not sitting on the bench like usual, standing, facing the direction I'd be coming from, as if he'd been watching for me. The duffel bag was at his feet, unzipped. Everything in my body told me to turn around. But where would I go? Back to the hospital, where there was no security willing to help? Weed in the lobby until morning? Then what? I'd still have to get home eventually. And there was that familiar pressure of being a woman in a public space. The fear of overreacting, of causing a scene, of being labeled paranoid or difficult. So I kept walking, each step feeling like I was wading through something thick and heavy. When I reached the shelter, I positioned myself as far from him as possible, literally pressing myself against the opposite end of the structure. The bus schedule display showed 8 minutes until arrival. 8 minutes. I could manage 8 minutes.
He picked up his duffel bag. My entire body tensed, adrenaline flooding my system with such force that my vision sharpened and my hearing seemed to amplify. I could hear his breathing, heavy and deliberate. I could hear the rustle of fabric as he moved. He took a step toward me. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and called 911. I didn't care anymore about seeming paranoid. My thumb hovered over the call button as I stared at him, making sure he saw what I was doing. He stopped moving. We stood there, locked in this tense standoff, him watching me watching him, my finger ready to complete the call. And then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A whisper, so quiet I almost missed it beneath the sound of distant traffic. But I heard it. He was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Steady, rhythmic, each number enunciated with careful precision. He was counting the minutes until the bus arrived. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just someone who made me uncomfortable. This was someone who had been planning something, someone who had been watching me long enough to know my schedule, my routine, my patterns, someone who had been waiting for an opportunity. I pressed the call button. Before the emergency operator even finished asking about my location, the man suddenly bent down, grabbed his duffel bag, and walked away. Not toward the hospital parking lot, not down the street toward any visible destination. He walked directly into the vacant lot behind the shelter, pushing through a gap in the chain-link fence, and disappeared into the darkness between the abandoned buildings. I gave the operator my information, described what had happened, provided a description of the man. They said they'd send a patrol car. The bus arrived before the police did. I got on, found a seat near the driver, and spent the entire ride home checking over my shoulder, convinced I'd see that navy jacket, that flat stare, those mechanical movements. The police never found him. No one matching his description was located in the area. The hospital security footage showed him at the bus stop on multiple occasions, but never captured a clear view of his face. The cameras were angled to monitor the hospital entrance, not the public sidewalk. I gave up that job 2 weeks later, started working day shifts at a restaurant downtown. I never waited at that bus stop again.
But here's what haunts me about that night. After I'd moved on, started rebuilding my sense of safety, I was scrolling through local news and found an article from about 6 months after my encounter. A woman's body had been found in one of those abandoned commercial buildings across from the hospital. She'd been a nursing assistant, worked the night shift, took the same bus route I used to take. The investigation was ongoing, but police were looking for a man seen in the area. The witness description mentioned a navy jacket and a duffel bag. I called the detective listed in the article, told them everything. They took my statement, added it to their file, but without a clear image, without a name, without anything concrete, what could they do? The case went cold, and somewhere out there, he's still waiting, maybe at a different bus stop, maybe watching a different woman who works late shifts and can't afford taxi fare, maybe counting down the minutes until the next opportunity presents itself. If you're enjoying these stories and they're making you think twice about your own late-night travel habits, consider subscribing for more true horror stories every week. These aren't fiction designed to entertain. These are real experiences from real people, and understanding what happened to them might just keep you safer.
So here's the thing about taking buses late at night. The crime rate on public transit has been getting worse. City police departments have been reporting more and more assaults on buses and trains, and a lot of it involves people who are homeless or dealing with serious mental health issues. It's created this environment where you just never know what's going to happen on your commute. You're just trying to get to work or get home, and suddenly you're stuck in a situation you never signed up for. This is the story of how I ended up in one of those situations. I was a 19-year-old community college student working part-time at a 24-hour pharmacy. My shift ran from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning, 4 nights a week. The schedule was brutal for maintaining any kind of social life, but it paid better than daytime work and didn't conflict with my morning classes. I relied entirely on the bus system to get to and from work.
I didn't have a car, and the pharmacy was located in a neighborhood I definitely couldn't afford to live in. The night bus route was always an experience, let me tell you. You'd see every type of person imaginable during those late hours. Healthcare workers still in their scrubs, heading home after pulling double shifts. Fast food and restaurant workers smelling like fryer grease, dead on their feet. Security guards, janitors, hotel staff. Basically all the people who keep the world running while everyone else is asleep. But mixed in with all these regular working people, you'd also see the city's darker side. People living rough, riding the buses because they literally had nowhere else to go. I'd learned how to handle myself on these rides. Keep your headphones in, even if you're not actually listening to music. Don't make eye contact with anyone. Don't engage in conversation. Don't pull out your phone unless you absolutely have to, because that basically advertises that you've got something worth stealing. Try to sit near the driver if you can, and always, always stay alert. It's not that I felt threatened every single night. Most of the time, nothing happened. But you develop this awareness, this sixth sense for when the vibe is off, when something's about to go wrong. This particular night started like any other. I finished my shift, locked up the pharmacy, and walked the 2 blocks to my bus stop. It was a Friday night, technically Saturday morning, around 2:15 when I reached the shelter. The area was relatively well lit, situated near a cluster of fast food restaurants that stayed open late for the bar crowd. Even at this hour, there was usually some activity. People stumbling out of nearby clubs, cars cruising past, the distant wail of sirens that was just part of the city's soundtrack. There were 3 other people at the stop when I arrived. An older woman in a hospital custodian's uniform sitting on the bench and looking at her phone. A young guy in a delivery driver's outfit, maybe early 20s, standing and smoking a cigarette. And a man hunched in the corner of the shelter, wearing layers of mismatched clothing despite the warm night, talking quietly to himself.
I'd seen people like him plenty of times on the night routes. A lot of transit systems had become sort of unofficial shelters, with homeless folks using the buses and stations as places to sleep when they've got nowhere else to go. Many of them are dealing with mental illness, addiction, sometimes both. These are people who've been completely failed by the system, who don't have access to the help they desperately need. I tried to have compassion for them, tried to understand what they were going through. But you can be compassionate and still be cautious, you know? I made sure to stand near the delivery driver, keeping plenty of distance from the guy in the corner. The man's muttering was constant but unintelligible, just a low stream of words that blurred together into white noise. The woman in the custodian uniform seemed unbothered, still focused on her phone. The delivery driver finished his cigarette, crushed it under his shoe, and pulled out his own phone. Everything felt normal. Uncomfortable maybe, but normal for a late-night bus stop. Our bus pulled up exactly on schedule. The doors hissed open, and we filed on. The driver barely glanced at us as we paid our fares or scanned our passes. The interior was more crowded than I'd expected for this hour. Maybe 15 people scattered throughout the bus. The woman in the uniform took a seat near the front. The delivery driver moved toward the back. I found a spot in the middle, an aisle seat with no one directly next to me. The man from the corner was the last to board. He didn't pay, just walked past the driver who didn't even look up from whatever he was doing on his phone. The man moved down the aisle with an unsteady gait, that constant muttering following him like a cloud. He passed my row, continued toward the back, and sat down in the seat directly behind the delivery driver. The bus lurched into motion. I settled into my seat, pulled out my phone, and started scrolling through social media without really absorbing any of it, just going through the motions, killing time until my stop. The route would take about 35 minutes, 10 more stops before mine. I'd done this journey hundreds of times. We'd made maybe 3 stops when I first noticed the change in atmosphere. The general low-level noise on the bus had quieted. That muttering from the back had stopped.
I glanced up from my phone and saw several passengers looking in the same direction, toward the rear of the bus. Something was happening. The man who'd boarded last was standing in the aisle now. He'd shed one of his layers, a dirty green jacket, and it lay crumpled on the floor. He was gesturing wildly, having what appeared to be an animated conversation with someone who wasn't there. His voice had gotten louder, more agitated. I still couldn't make out distinct words, but the tone had shifted from that gentle murmur to something sharper, more confrontational.
The delivery driver was pressed against the window, clearly trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the man now standing directly over him. A woman sitting across the aisle had gathered her belongings and moved several rows forward. The bus driver kept his eyes straight ahead, focused on the road, though I could see his gaze flicking to the mirror every few seconds. This wasn't entirely unusual. Mental health crises on public transit were common enough that most regular riders had witnessed them. Usually the person would escalate for a bit, maybe yell at their invisible antagonist, possibly get off at the next stop, and that would be the end of it. Uncomfortable, yes, but not necessarily dangerous. I told myself this was just another one of those situations. Stay calm, stay aware, get off at your stop as planned. Then the man reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a knife. Not a small pocket knife. This was a folding knife with at least a 4-inch blade, the kind you'd use for camping or hunting, the kind that could do serious damage. He held it low, near his hip, fingers wrapped around the handle, and he was staring directly at the delivery driver, who had frozen completely, eyes wide with terror. The entire bus went silent, that electric kind of silence where everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every muscle in my body had tensed, preparing to move, though I had no idea where I would go. We were on a moving bus. There was nowhere to run. The man with the knife started talking again, but this time his words were clear. He was addressing the delivery driver, accusing him of following him, of being part of some conspiracy, of trying to poison his mind. Classic paranoid delusions. The driver was shaking his head, hands raised in a placating gesture, trying to diffuse the situation without making any sudden movements. I slowly reached for the emergency button strip that ran along the windows, the one you could pull to alert the driver. But before my fingers even touched it, I saw the bus driver's hand move to his radio. He was already calling it in, already requesting police, already updating dispatch on the situation. His voice was remarkably calm, professional, giving our exact location and heading. The bus was still moving. I couldn't understand why he wasn't stopping. Then I realized he was trying to get us to a safer location, somewhere with better lighting, more witnesses, closer to police response. He was driving toward the nearest major intersection, a spot where several routes converged, and there was always more activity. The man with the knife was getting more agitated. His accusations were becoming more elaborate, more threatening. He took a step closer to the delivery driver, brandishing the knife in a way that made his intent clear. This wasn't just intimidation. He was preparing to use it.
That's when the woman who'd been sitting in the custodian uniform stood up. She was maybe 5'3", probably in her 50s. Absolutely unremarkable in every way, except for the complete lack of fear in her voice when she spoke. "Hey," she said, loud and firm. "Hey, look at me." The man with the knife turned, confused by this new voice. "I'm a nurse," the woman continued, which might have been true or might have been a strategic lie. "I can see you're not feeling well. You're confused. That's okay. But you need to put the knife down so I can help you." She was using the kind of voice you'd use with a frightened child, authoritative but not aggressive,
clear but not confrontational. The man stared at her, the knife still in his hand but no longer pointed at anyone. For a moment, I thought it might actually work. She was cutting through his delusions, grounding him in reality. Then his expression changed. Whatever brief moment of clarity he'd had vanished, replaced by renewed suspicion. "You're with them," he hissed. "You're all working together." The bus driver accelerated, running a red light at an empty intersection. I could hear sirens now, getting closer. We were almost to the major stop, just a few more blocks. The man turned back toward the delivery driver, who had nowhere to go, trapped against the window. The knife was rising. Someone screamed, and then everything happened at once. The bus driver slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration threw everyone forward. The man with the knife stumbled, caught off balance. In that moment of confusion, three things happened simultaneously. The woman who claimed to be a nurse rushed down the aisle. A passenger I hadn't even noticed, a large man in construction clothes, came from the opposite direction, and the bus doors opened. What followed was chaotic but brief. The construction worker grabbed the man's arm, the one holding the knife. They struggled, crashing against the seats. The woman was shouting, trying to get the delivery driver out of the danger zone. Other passengers were scrambling toward the exits, desperate to get off the bus. I found myself swept along in the rush, pushed toward the rear exit by the crowd. My feet hit the pavement and I stumbled, catching myself against a lamp post. Behind me, more people were streaming off the bus. And then the police arrived. 3 cars converging on the scene with lights blazing and officers moving quickly to secure the situation.
I later learned that the man was taken into custody without anyone being seriously injured. The construction worker had a minor cut on his hand from where the knife blade had grazed him during the struggle. The delivery driver was treated for shock. The bus was taken out of service, declared a crime scene until investigators could document everything. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. I did some research afterward trying to make sense of what happened. Charlotte, North Carolina recently experienced a horrifyingly similar incident where a woman named Irina Zarutska was fatally stabbed on a light rail train. The attack was random, unprovoked, captured on surveillance footage. The perpetrator had a history of mental health issues and previous arrests. He'd been released back into the community despite clear warning signs that he was dangerous. The man from my bus had a similar history. I found this out through news reports about the incident. He'd been arrested multiple times for assault, had documented schizophrenia, had been in and out of emergency psychiatric care. And yet there he was, carrying a weapon, riding public transit, escalating to violence. How many near misses had there been before that night? How many other passengers had encountered him during an episode and just happened to get lucky? These stories get even darker. If you're already thinking about your own commute and about the people you share space with late at night, hit the like button, comment with your own transit experiences, and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone who relies on public transportation after dark. The incident changed how I traveled. I stopped taking that late route, started carpooling with coworkers, even though it meant paying a share of gas money I could barely afford. Eventually quit that job altogether and found work with better hours in a safer neighborhood. But I still think about that night, about how close we came to a tragedy, about how the system had failed that man long before he got on that bus with a knife, about the delivery driver, trapped against that window staring at a blade that was seconds away from changing his life forever.
And I think about the woman in the custodian uniform. The one who stood up, who tried to de-escalate, who put herself at risk to protect a stranger. I never got her name, never had a chance to thank her. But she's the reason that night ended with everyone going home instead of in ambulances or worse. She's proof that sometimes courage looks like a tired healthcare worker in a rumpled uniform, using her voice as the only weapon she has against chaos.
The bus company sent me a generic email about a week later. They apologized for the traumatic experience, assured me they were reviewing their safety protocols, and offered me a month of free bus passes, as if free transportation on the same system where I'd nearly witnessed a murder was somehow an adequate response. I didn't use them. I gave them to a classmate who needed them more than I did. I don't take public transit anymore. It's not financially practical, and I know I'm privileged to have other options now. But every time I drive past a bus stop after dark, I look at the people waiting there, the exhausted workers, the marginalized individuals, the students and low-wage employees who don't have the luxury of choosing safer transportation. And I wonder how many of them will have their own story to tell. How many of them are one late-night route, one disturbed passenger, one moment of bad luck away from being a news headline? That man from the bus who's still in the system somewhere, probably cycled through psychiatric evaluation, released when the facility needs space or funding runs out, back on the streets until the next crisis. It's not a question of if he'll hurt someone, it's a question of when and whether anyone will be there to stop him before he does.
I'm a 32-year-old IT contractor working nights, maintaining servers for this hospital network. My shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and I've been taking the same bus route for almost 3 years now. You'd think that kind of routine would make you feel comfortable, maybe even safe because everything's so familiar, right? Wrong. Total wrong. The bus stop where I wait sits in what city planners like to call a transitional neighborhood. That's basically code for a place that isn't quite nice but isn't quite rough either, stuck in this weird middle ground where old houses bump up against small warehouses and light industrial buildings. During the day, it actually looks okay. You've got these small houses with chain-link fences, little corner stores with hand-painted signs, the kind of working-class area where people know their neighbors and everyone's just trying to get by. But at night, total transformation. The houses become these dark shapes in the shadows. The corner stores pull down their security gates, and the streetlights, which were probably installed like 30 years ago and never properly fixed, barely cast enough light to see where you're walking. My bus stop sits right at this intersection where a regular street meets a bigger avenue, positioned under one of those dying streetlights, with a closed auto repair shop on one side and a chain-link fence around an empty lot on the other. For the first year I used that stop, nothing weird happened at all. I wait my 10 or 15 minutes for the bus, maybe see one or two other people heading home from late shifts, and that was it. Boring, almost mind-numbingly predictable. The weird stuff started so slowly that I didn't even realize there was a pattern until way later. Little things at first. The bus shelter's bench, which had been fine before, suddenly had this huge crack running down the middle. I figured someone had vandalized it. Then the plastic walls of the shelter got covered in graffiti, these elaborate spray-painted designs that must have taken hours to finish. Whoever did it would have had to work in the dead of night when nobody was around. Again, I didn't think much of it. Graffiti was pretty normal in this neighborhood. But then I started noticing the trash. Not random litter, but specific items arranged in deliberate ways. A row of empty bottles lined up along the curb, organized by size. Cigarette butts formed into small circular patterns on the ground. Fast food containers stacked into precise pyramids. Someone was spending time at this bus stop when I wasn't there, and they were leaving evidence of routines, rituals, behaviors that suggested something more than just passing through.
Look, when it comes to staying safe at bus stops, there are some pretty obvious things that make a huge difference. Good lighting is critical, especially if you're a woman waiting by yourself. Being able to see what's around you, having nearby buildings where people might notice if something's wrong, having cameras or at least open sight lines so you're not completely hidden from view, and not having a bunch of places where someone could hide and watch you. My bus stop failed on every single one of these points. The lighting was terrible, nobody could see what was happening there from the nearby houses, and that vacant lot, perfect hiding spot for anyone who wanted to watch without being seen.
I started taking photos of the trash arrangements on my phone, not because I thought they were particularly significant at the time, but because they were so odd. I'd show them to coworkers, make jokes about the mysterious Busstop artist. We'd laugh about it, speculate about what kind of person had that much time and energy to arrange garbage into geometric patterns. It was weird, sure, but harmless. Then one night, about 6 months into this pattern, I arrived at my bus stop to find something that changed everything. Someone had arranged a circle of objects on the bench where I usually sat. 6 items, evenly spaced, forming a perfect ring. A bottle cap, a cigarette lighter, a bottle opener, a crumpled receipt, a broken pen, and in the center, lying flat on the bench, my work ID badge. I'd lost that badge 3 weeks earlier, assumed it had fallen out of my pocket somewhere, reported it to security, got a replacement. There was no way for it to have just shown up here by accident. Someone had found it, kept it, and deliberately placed it as part of this bizarre display. I didn't sit down. I called security at work, asked if anyone had turned in a badge recently, described the situation. The guard I spoke with was concerned enough to say he'd make a note in the log and suggest I file a police report if I felt threatened. But what was I reporting? Someone arranged trash and returned my lost ID? It sounded absurd when I tried to explain it. I took the badge, disrupting the circle, and waited for my bus standing up. The entire time I felt watched, not just the general unease of being alone in a dimly lit area, but the specific sensation of eyes on me. I kept turning, scanning the shadows beyond the streetlight's reach, looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just the empty street, the closed auto shop, the vacant lot behind its fence. My bus was late that night, only by about 8 minutes, but those 8 minutes stretched out unbearably. Every small sound made me flinch. A cat knocking over a trash can 3 houses down felt like a threat. A car driving past with its bass thumping seemed ominous. When the bus finally arrived, I practically ran onto it, relief flooding through me as the doors closed and we pulled away. I should have changed my route after that. There was another stop about 4 blocks away, closer to a busier intersection with better lighting. It would have added maybe 10 minutes to my walk from home, but it would have been safer. I knew this. But there's this strange psychology that happens when you're confronted with potential danger. You minimize it. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You don't want to seem paranoid, don't want to let fear dictate your choices. So you convince yourself it was just a weird coincidence and maintain your routine. For 2 weeks, nothing else happened. The trash arrangements continued, but no more personal items appeared. I'd arrive, wait for my bus, leave. Normal. I started to relax again, started to believe I'd made too much of the ID badge incident.
Then came the photographs. I found them tucked under the bench one night, held down by a rock so they wouldn't blow away. 4 printed photos, the kind you'd get from a basic inkjet printer, edges slightly curled from moisture. Every single one was of me at this bus stop, waiting. 3 of them were taken from somewhere across the street, probably from inside or near the vacant lot. The angle was wrong for anything else. The 4th was taken from much closer, almost directly behind where I usually stood, close enough that you could see I was looking at my phone, reading something on the screen. The photos weren't recent. I could tell because in all of them I was wearing a jacket I'd stopped wearing a month ago after spilling coffee on it. Whoever took these pictures had been documenting me for weeks, possibly months. They'd been that close without me knowing. They'd been watching long enough to know my schedule, my habits, my patterns. This time I called the police immediately, didn't wait until I got to work. I was standing at that bus stop holding these photos with shaking hands and told the dispatcher exactly what was happening. They said an officer would be there within 20 minutes. I asked if I should move to a different location, somewhere more public. They advised me to stay put if I felt safe enough, that it would be better for the responding officer to see the scene exactly as I'd found it. 20 minutes is a long time when you're waiting for help. I paced the sidewalk, staying in the brightest part of the streetlight's coverage, turning in slow circles to keep my entire surroundings in view. Every shadow looked like a person. Every small sound became a footstep.
And the worst part was knowing that whoever had taken these photos might be watching right now, observing my reaction, feeding off my fear. The officer who arrived was sympathetic but limited in what he could do. He collected the photos, took my statement, photographed the bus stop and surrounding area. But without any suspect to investigate, without any actual threats made, without any laws technically broken, his hands were tied. Taking photos of people in public isn't illegal. Leaving printed copies for them to find crosses a line into harassment, maybe stalking. But prosecution would require identifying who was doing it. The photos themselves had no metadata, no identifying information. They were printed on standard paper using standard ink, untraceable.
He did increase patrols in the area, promised that officers would drive by the bus stop several times during the night shift. He suggested I vary my routine, consider that other bus stop, maybe arrange for rides with coworkers when possible. All reasonable advice that I fully intended to follow. The police presence worked, sort of. For about a month, I didn't find any more photos or personal items. The trash arrangements stopped appearing. Even the graffiti stopped growing. I started to believe that whoever was doing this had been scared off by the police involvement. I started taking my regular bus stop again, though I never fully relaxed there. I always stood rather than sitting, always kept my back to the shelter's wall so I could see the entire area, always had my phone ready to call for help. Then, 6 weeks after the photos, I arrived at the bus stop and immediately knew something was wrong. The air felt different. Wrong. I can't explain it better than that, just this gut-level certainty that the situation had changed. I stopped before entering the shelter, scanning the area, trying to identify what had triggered my instincts. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the vacant lot, about 30 feet back from the chain-link fence, partially obscured by overgrown weeds and the frame of an abandoned shopping cart. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the bus stop, facing me. And here's what's next, but I need you to hear this because what happened after I saw him changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The end of this story involves local police, security footage, and information that made me realize I'd been in far more danger than I ever imagined. We locked eyes through the fence. In the weak streetlight, I couldn't make out his features clearly, just a silhouette, motionless, watching. My hands fumbled for my phone. I pulled it out, started to dial 911 again, and the man moved. Not toward me, not away. He just shifted his position slightly, stepping more fully into a patch of shadow, becoming harder to see while still maintaining that constant observation. The dispatcher answered. I was trying to explain the situation, give my location, describe the man in the lot, when my bus appeared down the street. It was early, unusually early, approaching the stop a full 5 minutes before its scheduled time. The driver must have been ahead of schedule and decided to wait at my stop rather than somewhere else along the route. I made a split-second decision. Stay and wait for police, standing exposed under that streetlight with a stalker watching from the darkness? Or get on the bus, get to work, call the police from the safety of a building with security guards and cameras. I chose the bus. Told the dispatcher I was leaving the location but would call back once I reached work, and practically jumped through the doors as soon as they opened. Through the bus window, I watched the bus stop recede behind us. The man had moved closer to the fence. I could see him more clearly now, though still not clearly enough to provide a useful description to police. Average height, dark clothing, no distinguishing features visible. He stood there until the bus turned a corner and the scene disappeared from view. At work, I filed another police report. Security reviewed the footage from cameras covering the area around our building, but none captured anything useful from that bus stop. It was just outside their range. The investigating officer pulled up a map, showed me the vacant lot's boundaries, explained it was private property involved in some kind of legal dispute between the owner and the city. No development,
No maintenance, just an empty space gradually being reclaimed by weeds and occupied by whoever wanted to use it without permission. Here's where the story takes a turn that still keeps me up at night. 2 days after this incident, police arrested a man in connection with a different case, a series of home invasions in the same general neighborhood where my bus stop was located. During a search of his vehicle, they found dozens of printed photographs. Different women, different locations, all taken without the subject's knowledge. Some of these women had reported being followed, receiving strange gifts, finding evidence that someone had been in their homes. When detectives reached out to me to ask if I could identify any photographs, I recognized myself immediately. There were 7 photos in total. 4 were the ones I'd found at the bus stop. 3 were new to me. One showed me walking to work from a different bus stop on a day when I had arrived early and decided to walk the last few blocks. One showed me entering my apartment building, and one, taken through a window, showed me inside my apartment.
He'd been in my building, inside, close enough to photograph me through my living room window. The photo was taken at night, meaning he'd been there in the darkness, watching through glass while I went about my evening completely unaware. The timestamp on the file showed it was from 2 months earlier, before I'd even found the first arrangement of trash at the bus stop. The man is currently awaiting trial. He's been charged with multiple counts of stalking, harassment, burglary, and attempted assault. One of his other victims interrupted him during a home invasion. She fought back, escaped, and provided the description that eventually led to his arrest. According to investigators, he had a pattern. He'd identify women who used public transit, who had predictable routines, who lived in ground floor or easily accessible apartments. He'd document them, learn their schedules, collect personal information, and then he'd escalate to entering their homes, sometimes taking items, sometimes just moving things around, establishing a presence. The vacant lot where I'd seen him watching was his observation post. Police found evidence that he'd been using it regularly. Discarded food containers, a camping chair hidden in the weeds, even a small notebook with handwritten notes about various women's schedules and routines. My name was in that notebook. It listed my work hours, my bus schedule, my home address, and a note that simply said, "Ground floor, kitchen window accessible." I don't live in that apartment anymore. Broke my lease, paid the penalty fee, and moved to a third-floor unit in a building with better security and no easy access from the outside. I don't take public transit late at night anymore. I drive now, park in well-lit areas, vary my routes home, all the precautions I should have been taking all along, but didn't because I never really believed I was in that kind of danger. The detective who worked the case told me I was lucky. Not because nothing worse happened, but because I paid attention. I noticed the patterns. I reported the warning signs. I trusted my instincts when that situation felt wrong. According to him, most of his stalking cases don't get reported until after a physical assault. Most victims minimize the early warning signs, convince themselves they're overreacting, don't want to bother police with something that seems minor. By the time they realize the severity of the situation, the stalker has already escalated to violence.
If you've made it this far in these stories, I want you to do something. Check your own routines. Think about where you're most vulnerable, those places where you're predictable, exposed, visible to anyone who might be watching. Your regular bus stop, the path you take home from work, the windows in your apartment that face the street. Because the most terrifying thing I learned from this experience is how easy it is to become a target, how little it takes for someone to decide you're worth their obsessive attention, how long they can watch and plan and prepare before you even know they exist. The trial is scheduled for next spring. I'll have to testify, describe finding those photos, identify the pictures taken of me, relive the fear of standing at that bus stop knowing someone was documenting my every move.
The prosecutor says it's an important case, that my testimony helps establish his pattern of behavior, demonstrates the calculated nature of his stalking. She assures me that with the evidence they have, conviction is likely. But conviction doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give me back the sense of security I used to have. It doesn't stop me from checking over my shoulder constantly, from examining every person on the street as a potential threat, from lying awake at night wondering if there's someone else out there, someone who hasn't been caught yet, who's watching and waiting and planning. That bus stop is still there. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work. The trash arrangements have started appearing again. Different patterns, different items, but the same deliberate placement. Either someone else has started using that location as their observation post, or it was never just one person to begin with. I've reported it to police. They've increased patrols again, but they can't watch everywhere, can't protect everyone, can't prevent every tragedy before it happens. If you have a story about feeling unsafe on public transit, or you've noticed someone who seemed too interested in your routine, share it in the comments below. Not to scare people, but to remind everyone that these situations are more common than we want to believe. And maybe your story will be the wake-up call someone needs to start paying attention, to trust their instincts, to report warning signs before they escalate into something worse.